His device trembled, and the word came out where it should not have, wife. A translator bug had just set a crown on her head, and the queen believed it. Liana Harrow tasted copper and ash as the crowd's murmur rose like a tide. The hall of glass and steel bent light into 100 small suns. Banners of the human court hung between pillars, their edges still crisp from the morning air. Liana's ears, long and pale beneath the hood, flattened for an instant. Beside her, Ember coiled low, scales whispering like knives against stone. The dragon's heat hummed along Liana's calf. Where human flesh reddened beneath armor, the dragon's warmth felt like a promise. A translator tube, a sleek mechanical thing no larger than a bracelet, had been clipped at the envoy's throat for the opening exchange. It had been calibrated for the human tongue. It claimed to parse flawlessly. For a dozen protocols and polite formulae, it had performed reliably. Then, in a single syllable, it failed. The human envoy, Daniel Cade, smiled with earnestness and bowed. The translator blinked, transmitted, and the hall heard, in Liana's native cadence, a word none of them expected. Wife. Silence, then a ripple. The queen's attendants stiffened. A noble behind Liana shifted his weight, lids narrowing. Daniel's brow creased. His lips moved, attempting correction in dry human vowels that did not reach the ears prepared to receive them. But the damage had been done. Among humans, and among elves, names and titles were not just words. They were bindings, threads that sewed custom and intent into law. In the language of the court, wife could imply claim, alliance, even inheritance. Liana's stomach clenched. She had come as an emissary of the Northern Vale, a soldier sworn to the old rights, not a pawn in the court's rumor mills. She had come with Ember and Rook, the latter, a lanky silver with a temper like a struck wire, because dragons were both shield and signal in her homeland. They had always been by her side. They were not treaty tokens. Yet now, as the queen's gaze slivered toward the dais where Liana stood, Liana felt the hall fold inward with implication. The queen rose with deliberate grace, silk whispering like a held breath. She was one of that new kind of ruler who mixed old ceremony with modern calculation. Metal collars traced her jaw like filigree, and a compact translator sat neatly against her pulse. Her eyes, dark and exacting, found Liana's and did not soften. If anything, that look sharpened the moment into a blade edge. "You claim partnership," the queen said, voice even. The translator at her wrist, smoothing her human syllables into the court's lingua franca. "Explain." The court leaned. Cameras, discreet, humming, tilted, collecting the drama for those not present. News feeds would feed on this tonight in 1,000 languages. Liana's heart hammered. She could hear Ember's breath in sync, a steadying drum. She stepped forward because retreat would be read as guilt. "Your Majesty," she began, choosing the human tongue with care. Her accent was faint, a relic of Vale Hills and salt wind, but the court had grown accustomed to her speech. "There has been a mistake." The envoy's translator malfunctioned. A murmur of agreement from the human delegation felt hollow, a fragile reed against the current of suspicion. Daniel Cade, pale under his polished collar, produced a small device and tapped. Light flared as his translator logged the exchange. "Calibration error," he said plainly, voice thin with panic. The device misrendered a phrase. "I said, honored guest." The queen's smile did not reach her eyes. "Honored guest," she repeated slowly. "And yet the device spoke wife. Does your Vale language conflate hospitality with vows?" Liana swallowed. In her tongue, the closest inflection of the human word could, in old contexts, bind two houses, but only if both parties consented and the binding was spoken within the rites. There had been no right. There had been only a faulty filament of code. "Not at all," Liana said. "We do not bind strangers with a single greeting. If the translation rendered it so, that is a device error. I have no claim on anyone here beyond my mission." She felt Rook's tail flick behind her, a clear note of agitation. Ember's nostrils flared. The dragon's golden eyes tracked the queen, as if measuring the distance between them in heartbeats. Dragons sense things people could not see, subaudible shifts in breath, the micropulse of a body's fear. Ember's scales hummed with tension. Liana relied on that hum. She was a warrior used to finding truth in animal instincts when human law bent like a reed in storm. The Queen's chief advisor, a thin man with too many rings, stepped forward. "Protocol demands an explanation," he said. "Public misstatements of union have consequences." His smile was a lawyer's blade. He did not say convenient, but everyone heard it. Liana's jaw tightened. She had not come for courts and contracts. She had come for a conference about the ancient wards that topped the Vale's high passes. She had not expected to be embroiled in successional shadowplay, yet the world was a spiderweb. A single wrong thread could vibrate every other connection. "Then examine the device," Daniel pleaded. He turned to his aide. There was a tug in his sleeve that betrayed shame. "Run diagnostics. Check the logs." A cluster of technicians advanced, devices clicking, fingers moving with practiced calm. Screens flared in the doorway as lines of code scrolled, tiny heartbeats of logic in black and green. For a moment, the court hushed to watch the machine exhale its truth. But Liana felt an unease that had nothing to do with code. Her life among the Vale had taught her that machines were clever. Yes, but they did not lie with intent. People did. There was a poetry of deception that ran beneath circuits and speech. The deliberate placement of an error to start a fire. She thought of the nights at the border, where scouts disappeared into fog and returned with stories of new weapons and forged documents. She thought of a human faction that had long wished to bind the Vale more tightly into the Southern Confederation. A false marriage claim, public, scandalous, could be a lever to provoke panic, to force an alliance or a surrender. Ember shifted, sending a small, heated plume into the air that smelled faintly of brimstone. The dragon's pupils narrowed. It was a silent warning. Liana heard it as clearly as any whispered counsel. "Your Majesty," she said, softer now. "If this was an accident, let the logs show it. If it was not, then let us be precise. A false declaration at this level is an act of political sabotage." The Queen's gaze lingered, inscrutable. Behind her, the court's network siphoned and stored every syllable. Outside, the city's towers blinked like watchful eyes. Liana felt suddenly small and central at once, like an axis around which rumor would rotate. Someone, in the crowd's periphery, began to clap slowly. It was meant to be irony, a thin, dangerous sound. Liana's lips parted to answer when a shout from beyond the doors ruptured the hall. The outer guard's bells, urgent and raw, a ruckus on the plaza. The translator's logs blinked still. The Queen straightened, signaling a pause. "Debrief," she said at last, voice threaded with command. "All parties remain. No one leaves the court until this matter is resolved." Chains of protocol slid into place. The human envoy dropped his shoulders as if a weight had been set upon him. Liana could read the shift. They were no longer envoys, but suspects in a public drama. Ember crept closer to her boot, a silent and immovable ally. As the doors closed with a solemn thud, sealing the court from the city's noise, Liana realized the translator bug had done more than misname her life. It had opened the door onto a plot she did not understand and a power that would not forgive a perceived slight. She had come to lecture on wards and water, but now she stood at the beginning of something thorned and deep. In the jade reflection of the hall's panes, she saw herself twice, once as the Vi's warrior and once as the human-labeled wife she had never consented to be. Between those reflections, the dragon shifted, and Liana drew a breath that tasted of ash and iron, and resolved to find out who had rewritten words into weapons. The court's heavy doors closed with a final, echoing thud that made the banners tremble. The Queen sat again upon her silvered throne, her fingers resting lightly on the armrests as though on the hilt of a hidden blade. The hall's vastness felt suddenly claustrophobic. Liana stood where she had before, the dragon's close, Ember's wings half-folded in restrained tension, and Rook's tail twitching like a pendulum. A human envoy, Daniel Cade, wiped his palms against his tunic, his translator still pinned to his collar like an incriminating badge. The technicians worked in silence at a small console brought before the throne, pulling data from the translator. Holographic code shimmered in a faint green haze, characters rising and falling like silent rain. The advisor with too many rings paced near the console, his narrow eyes scanning the streams. Liana's own attention drifted to the queen. The woman's stillness was not born of patience, Liana thought, but of calculation. The dragons sensed it too. Both Ember and Rook shifted their weight subtly, their tails curling in mirror arcs of unease. The queen spoke at last, her voice low but carrying clearly through the hall. "Commander Harrow," she said, using Liana's rank in the Vale's army. "Your presence was meant to reassure me that your people come in good faith. Yet the first word the city hears from your human partner is one that implies union. Are you aware how swiftly rumor grows?" Liana kept her shoulders square. "I am aware, Your Majesty, but I did not invite it." The queen tilted her head slightly. "No one ever invites a storm. Still, we must decide whether it is natural weather or a weapon hurled by an unseen hand." Liana hesitated only a moment. "I believe the latter, Majesty. The timing was too perfect. This glitch, if it is a glitch, gives our enemies the very scandal they could use to fracture trust." The advisor chuckled softly, a dry sound. "Enemies? We see only a device misfiring." Rook's head dipped low, and a soft growl reverberated through the floor. It made the advisor step back half a pace. "Let the machine speak," the queen ordered, glancing at the console. A technician cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the logs. The translator's memory shows no evidence of damage or corruption. No malfunction detected in its last calibration cycle." Daniel's face drained of color. "That's impossible. It's been reliable for months." "I didn't say wife. I said honored guest." Liana narrowed her eyes. "If the device is intact, then the error was introduced externally, either through sabotage or interference. Can you detect traces of a forced update?" The technicians exchanged uneasy glances. "We see anomalies in the security logs." The device registered an incoming signal shortly before the exchange. The signature was masked. The queen's advisor frowned. "From where?" "From within the city's network," one technician said. "But it bounced through too many nodes to identify the source without more time." The queen leaned back, her fingers steepling. "So, either someone manipulated the device to cause this mistranslation, or we are dealing with a far more subtle enemy who wishes to pit our peoples against each other." The court murmured at that. A rumor sown in the first public exchange could harden into distrust long before the truth came out. Liana stepped forward, feeling Ember move slightly to her right in a protective arc. "Majesty, I request permission to investigate. If we find who did this, we can stop further sabotage before it breeds real conflict." The queen's eyes lingered on Liana for a long breath. "You would chase a phantom in a foreign city, with nothing but dragons and a nervous envoy beside you?" Liana allowed the faintest wry smile. "I face worse with less, and I have no wish to be remembered in your chronicles as a pawn in someone else's game." The queen's expression softened by a fraction enough for the court to notice but not comment upon. "Very well. You have my permission. But understand this, until the culprit is found, you and your companions remain under watch. Your movements will be monitored." Rook gave a low, disdainful rumble. Liana rested her hand lightly on the silver dragon's neck, calming him. "Understood, Majesty." The queen gestured to a guard captain, a tall woman in dark armor with sharp, clear eyes. "Captain Mara will be your liaison. She will ensure your safety and see that you do not wander into places you should not." The captain bowed slightly to the queen, then inclined her head to Liana. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a faint spark of curiosity in her gaze as it flicked to the dragons. "Majesty, I will assist the commander. This was my device, my responsibility." The queen acknowledged him with a curt nod. "See that you do." The session ended with the formal clang of the court bell. As the officials dispersed, whispers followed in their wake, whispers of scandal, of conspiracies, of a foreign warrior suddenly cast as a reluctant bride in a political drama. Outside, the city's evening had settled in. The vast avenues were lit by lines of blue-white street lamps. Air shuttles passed above like silver birds, and banners streamed from the high bridges in the cool wind. Captain Mara led them to a secure transit car. The dragons followed on padded feet, their presence scattering curious onlookers at the gates. Once inside the vehicle, Daniel let out a long breath. "I swear to you, Commander, I didn't say it." I know, Liana said quietly, but someone wanted you to. Or wanted us to look as though we had bound ourselves without consent. He glanced at the dragons as the car hummed into motion. I suppose that's good news. Means we have an enemy, not just bad luck. Bad luck doesn't forge code signatures, Liana replied. Her eyes lingered on the window, watching the city blur by towers gleaming like distant spears, the river beneath catching the starlight. Ember shifted beside her seat, lowering his massive head to rest near her knees. His golden eyes reflected the passing lights like molten coins. The warmth of his breath was a quiet reminder that, however tangled human politics became, the bond between dragon and rider was unshakable. Rook, less patient, flicked his tail against the floor and let out a short, huffing sound that might have been a dragon's equivalent of a scoff. Captain Mara broke the silence at last. Whoever sabotaged that translator wanted the Queen to doubt you. That means they understand politics, and they're close enough to the court to know which word would strike deepest. Liana nodded slowly. Which means the enemy isn't in some far-off fortress. They're here, in this city, and probably watching us already, Mara added, her tone grim but matter-of-fact. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The city's lights flickered across the glass like silent fireflies. Liana rested her hand on Ember's scaled neck. Then we will watch back, and we'll find the hand that rewrote a greeting into a weapon. Rain swept in over the city during the night, leaving the avenues slick and reflective beneath the morning lights. Liana Harrow watched from her temporary quarters high in the east tower of the palace as droplets ran down the window pane. The tower had once been a defensive bastion. Now it was a diplomatic wing, all polished stone and soft illumination, but the sense of being watched never quite faded. Ember and Rook rested near the broad balcony, their wings tucked close, eyes half-lidded. Yet both dragons were alert, their breathing too controlled for true sleep. The tension in the city had reached them as much as it had the humans. A soft knock sounded on the door. Liana turned, resting one hand on the hilt of the curved veil blade at her hip. Captain Mara entered, helmet tucked under her arm. Her dark hair was damp from the rain, her eyes sharp as always. "We have a lead," she said. Liana raised a brow. "So soon?" The technicians isolated a brief, unauthorized network pulse from a relay hub in the old trade quarter. Whoever sent it masked their signature well, but it's a starting point. Daniel, who had been sitting at the table, hunched over a datapad full of device diagnostics, looked up. If someone tampered with the translator from the trade quarter, they were close enough to monitor the whole event in real time, he said. Which suggests they wanted to see the reaction, Liana added. Mara nodded. "I can take you there, but we'll need to move quietly. Word of the Queen's anger has spread, and so has speculation about your supposed marriage." Liana felt her jaw tighten. Rumors had always been more difficult to fight than armies. Then let's give them no new story to feed on. The old trade quarter was a maze of narrow streets and towering arches where the rain pooled in dark stone gutters. The once bustling marketplace had become a warren of small workshops, data kiosks, and cheap boarding houses. The transit car could only go so far. From there, they went on foot. Mara led the way with the easy stride of someone accustomed to tight streets and watchful eyes. Daniel followed close behind, the translator clipped to his collar again, though set to passive mode. Liana came last, her dragons padding silently behind her. Even in the tight streets, the passers-by gave them a wide berth. No one wanted to brush too close to creatures whose eyes burned like gold and silver flame. They reached a squat building near the edge of a flooded courtyard. Mara halted and scanned the facade with a small device. This hub routed the signal. "There's a maintenance entry at the rear. We'll go in there." The door yielded to Mara's security pass. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp metal and old insulation. They descended narrow steps into a sublevel humming with power conduits. The low light gleamed on the wet stone walls. Rook hissed softly, the sound like metal scraping on ice. Ember's nostrils flared as if testing the air. Liana crouched and laid a hand against Ember's neck. "What do you sense?" The dragon's head tilted toward a dark corner where a nest of conduits disappeared into a maintenance tunnel. "There," Mara whispered. She drew her sidearm, a sleek kinetic pistol. Daniel's face was pale in the dim light. Liana moved forward, laid loose in her hand, and crouched near the tunnel mouth. A faint glow came from within, soft, like the dying pulse of a machine running on residual power. When she stepped inside, her boots splashed in shallow water. The tunnel narrowed, but then widened again into a small alcove where an old relay console hummed quietly. On the console screen was a single line of scrolling text. The word was only the beginning. Daniel stepped forward, eyes wide. "That's a message. They wanted us to find it." Liana examined the console carefully. "And they wanted us to know that this was not a single attack." Mara frowned, scanning the unit. "No traces of who left it. Whoever they are, they're skilled enough to erase their presence aside from the message." Liana glanced at her dragons. Rook shifted uneasily, tail scraping the wet floor. Ember lowered his head and let out a quiet growl that vibrated through the stone. "They're warning us," Liana said finally, "which means they're planning more. They won't be satisfied with a single word." Mara straightened. "Then we'll have to take this to the Queen. She needs to know this is more than a diplomatic embarrassment." The return to the palace was tense. Rain had eased but left the streets glistening. Security drones hovered near intersections. The sight of them made Daniel tighten his grip on the datapad where he had copied the relay's message. Back in the East Tower, a messenger met them at the door and gestured urgently. "The Queen has summoned you to the council chamber at once." They followed the messenger into the great chamber where the Queen awaited, flanked by her advisors and guards. Her gaze settled first on Liana, then on Daniel, then briefly on the dragons, as if measuring their steadiness. "You went into the city unsanctioned," the Queen said, her voice cool but even. Mara stepped forward, offering a brief bow. "Majesty, it was my decision to guide them. We found the lead." The Queen's eyes shifted to Liana. "And?" Liana drew herself up. "We found evidence that the translation incident was deliberate. More than that, Majesty, we found a message. Whoever is behind this is not finished." Daniel held out the datapad, which projected the captured line of text. The words glowed in the chamber's air like an omen. The word was only the beginning. A ripple of unease moved through the counselors. The Queen's fingers tightened on the armrest of her throne. "So, they mean to escalate. And by sowing this first rumor, they've already shaken the trust between our peoples. They want more than distrust," Liana said quietly. "They want to turn our alliance into open conflict. And they may not stop at words next time." The Queen's expression hardened, a look of steel beneath the calm veneer. "Then, we must be ready before they strike again." Rook's tail thumped against the polished floor, echoing like a drumbeat. Ember raised his head, golden eyes fixed on the Queen, as if sensing the shift in her resolve. Liana felt the weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders. They had uncovered only the first thread of a much larger web. The enemy had shown themselves only through a word and a warning, but that was enough to prove they were clever, dangerous, and close. Outside, the rain began again, drumming softly against the chamber's tall windows. The Queen rose, her presence commanding, her gaze unwavering. "Commander Harrow," she said, "you will continue your investigation with Captain Mara and the envoy. I will see to the court's readiness. Whoever thinks they can twist a single mistranslated word into a weapon will learn what it means to provoke a queen." Liana bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement. "Then we'll find them, Majesty, before they can turn their next word into a blade." Ember rumbled softly, a sound of support that resonated deep in Liana's chest. She glanced at the dragons and thought, for the briefest moment, that even in the middle of foreign intrigue and human politics, the bond of dragon and rider was her one unbroken certainty. The next day dawned gray and restless, clouds hanging low over the spires of the capital. The Queen's Council had worked through most of the night, dispatching discreet patrols to strengthen security around the palace and the major network hubs. But Liana Harrow woke with the uneasy sense that the enemy was still ahead of them, always a step farther in the dark. From her chamber's balcony, she watched Ember and Rook circle above the East Tower, their wings slicing the damp morning air. The dragons had not rested well. Their sharp senses were unsettled by something in the city, as if the stone streets themselves hummed with an unseen threat. Captain Mara arrived shortly after sunrise, her boots leaving damp prints on the polished floor. She gave Liana a brief nod. The Queen has summoned us. There's been another incident. Liana's fingers tightened on the leather strap that fastened her sword. What now? An encrypted message was broadcast on several public screens in the lower districts, Mara said grimly. Only for a few seconds before the feed cut. The words were the same as the relay message. The word was only the beginning. Daniel, who had slept slumped in a chair in the corner, stirred at the sound of their voices. His eyes were rimmed red. They're taunting us, showing they can reach anywhere, even the public screens. And that means they want the people afraid, Liana said. Fear can do more harm than armies. The council chamber was heavy with the scent of wet stone when they entered. The Queen sat at the head of a long table, her advisors lined on either side. On the central holo display shimmered a grainy recording of the hijacked message, white letters over a black field, cold and stark. The Queen's eyes were fixed on the display when she spoke. They want attention, she said, her voice clipped. And they have it. The lower districts are already whispering that the translation mishap was no accident, that it was a sign of some hidden pact between the Veil and this throne. Daniel's shoulders sagged. It's my fault for using the translator. No, Liana interrupted firmly. Your device was the weapon they chose, but you didn't forge the blade. We're dealing with a coordinated attack. Mara stepped forward and addressed the Queen. Majesty, the signal for the broadcast came from within the harbor district. The hub there controls several major data conduits. We believe the saboteurs are using it as a launch point. The Queen's advisor with the many rings frowned. The harbor district is vast warehouses, docks, ships. We cannot search it openly without causing panic. Then we won't search it openly, Liana said. Her voice was steady but carried the edge of command born from her years in the Veil's army. Give us leave to go and quietly meet Mara, Daniel, and the dragons. We'll find them. The Queen considered this for a long moment. Finally, she inclined her head. Go, but be careful. Whoever they are, they have already turned a single word into a weapon. They will not hesitate to wield sharper ones. The harbor district smelled of brine and wet iron. Tower cranes moved slowly against the horizon as rain-drenched barges slid along the piers. The team moved beneath the shadow of an abandoned warehouse whose windows were boarded with rust-streaked panels. The dragons waited outside, crouched low beneath a canopy of scaffolding. Ember's warm breath curled like mist in the cool air, while Rook's eyes swept the rooftops with a predator's focus. Inside, the warehouse was dim, lit only by the glow of screens bolted to steel columns. Some flickered with static, others showed fragments of data streams, lines of code cascading like falling rain. Daniel knelt near one terminal, frowning. They've routed everything through here. But it's odd. It's like someone left this trail for us to find. Mara scanned the shadows between the stacked cargo crates. A trap? Liana's hand hovered near the hilt of her sword. Or a message again. A faint chime rang from the far end of the warehouse. A screen there flared to life, casting a pale blue glow across the damp concrete. Words appeared, one by one. Trust breaks easier than steel. You chase ghosts while the city prepares for war. Daniel, read them aloud under his breath. They're mocking us. The screen flickered, then shifted to an image, a distorted silhouette, humanoid but faceless, voice replaced by a low synthetic whisper. You think this is about a single word, but the word was only the spark. The fire will burn your alliance before the next dawn. The image vanished, leaving only static. Mara muttered a curse. They know we're here. A sudden tremor shuddered through the floor. Outside, the dragons roared deep, resonant cries that made the steel walls vibrate. Liana spun toward the entrance. Something's wrong. They rushed outside in time to see a swarm of drone-like machines rising from the harbor's edge. Small, insect-like, they hovered in a loose formation, their eyes glowing crimson. Ember reared back, exhaling a warning plume of heated mist. Rook lowered his head, wings half opened, ready to strike. The lead drone projected a holographic symbol in the air, a jagged sigil unfamiliar to any of them. Then, without further warning, the swarm darted forward. Get down, Mara shouted, firing her kinetic pistol. The first few drones burst apart in sharp flashes of light and debris. Ember surged forward, claws tearing through another drone, while Rook's tail swept the air like a massive whip, shattering several more. Daniel scrambled behind a stack of containers, clutching the translator device as if it was still the key to everything. Liana drew her veil blade and slashed at a drone that came too close, sparks flying where steel met metal. "Fall back toward the dock," she called out over the rising din. The fight was brief but fierce. The dragon's raw power, combined with the sharp aim of Mara's pistol and Liana's blade, cut through the swarm. Yet several drones slipped past and vanished into the rain-shrouded streets beyond. When the last drone fell in pieces at their feet, Liana stood breathing hard, rain mingling with sweat on her brow. Ember's chest rose and fell heavily, golden eyes still fixed on the sky. Mara kicked aside a broken drone and crouched to examine its remains. These aren't ordinary street tech. Military-grade modifications, but not from any known army. Daniel's voice was quiet but grim. Whoever's behind this has resources. And they knew exactly where we'd be. Liana looked toward the dark waters of the harbor, her thoughts heavy. They're escalating. And they're not just trying to embarrass us anymore. They're preparing for something bigger. She rested a hand against Ember's warm neck. The dragon's breath steamed in the cool air, a living reminder of the ancient strength that still stood with her. Mara straightened, wiping rain from her brow. "We'll have to report back to the Queen, but I have a feeling she won't like what this means." Liana nodded. "No one will, because if they're right—" Her voice lowered, steady as a drawn blade. The word really was only the spark. Rain hammered the palace spires like a relentless drumbeat. The storm had moved in at dawn, but the harbor's salt-tanged air still clung to Liana's cloak as she strode into the council chamber. Ember and Rook waited outside in the courtyard, restless beneath the storm's crackling sky. The Queen sat in her high-backed chair, silver circlet gleaming despite the dim light. A half-dozen advisors murmured in low voices, but silence fell the moment Liana and her team entered. "You've seen the drones," Liana said without preamble. "They weren't raiders or scavengers. They were coordinated. Someone with resources is moving against us." The Queen's fingers tapped the arm of her chair. "And still you have no names to give me?" "Not yet," Mara admitted. "But they left a trail of code, deliberately, like they wanted us to find it." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, holding the translator device close to his chest as though the thing might hear them. "Whoever they are, they're obsessed with that first incident. With the word." The Queen's eyes hardened. "The word that made my court a stage for rumors and distrust." Liana took a step forward. "Majesty, we can't waste time on pride. This enemy isn't fighting with swords. They're attacking meaning itself. Twisting language, turning allies against one another." The Queen rose, her cloak falling like a wave of deep blue. "I know what's at stake, Commander Harrow. But my people demand answers. I cannot ask them to stand united while whispers claim that a single human's careless word bound our nations together in some clandestine oath." Her gaze fell on Daniel. He shifted again, but met her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen." The translator. "I know what you meant," the Queen cut in. "But intent does not stop rumors from spreading. Our enemies understand this. I fear they mean to tear our alliance apart from the inside." The storm worsened by mid-afternoon. Lightning licked the sky as if the heavens themselves were sharpening their blades. The team convened in the war room, its walls covered in hollow maps of the city. Pins of light marked the swarm's attack routes. More marked the unexplained signal pings in the harbor. Daniel hunched over a console, scrolling through streams of alien code. "It's like they're rewriting the lexicons. See this? Old word sets replaced with altered definitions. If this spreads into the city's civilian translators, people could start hearing the wrong words altogether," Mara finished grimly. "Every order, every negotiation twisted before it's even understood." Liana's jaw tightened. A war without armies. They'll make neighbors into enemies with a single sentence. The room fell silent for a moment, broken only by the distant boom of thunder. Liana turned to the dragon's handler, a quiet young man who had been feeding Ember and Rook since dawn. "How are they?" "On edge," he replied. "They feel something we don't. Like the air's charged. Wrong. Liana nodded. She'd long trusted her dragon's instincts. They had sensed ambushes in the wilds long before soldiers ever saw them. That night, the storm briefly cleared, and a pale, fractured moon hung over the city. Liana stood on the balcony outside her quarters, staring at the harbor lights shimmering on the water. She heard soft footsteps and glanced back to see Daniel approach. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head. "The enemy's playing a deeper game than I thought. They want us chasing their shadows, while they chip at the foundations of trust." Daniel leaned on the railing beside her. "I've been thinking. That first mistake I made. Calling you." His words trailed off as if the memory still embarrassed him. It's like they saw the effect it had, the way it shifted everything between us, between you and the Queen, and decided to weaponize it. "It wasn't your fault," Liana said softly. The wind tugged at a strand of her hair. "But yes, they saw a spark and fanned it into a blaze. Do you think—" He hesitated, then forced the question out. "Do you think the Queen will ever trust me again?" Liana's lips curved in a faint, weary smile. "Trust is a blade, Daniel. Dull it, and it won't cut when you need it. Break it, and it takes a master's work to reforge. We'll have to prove we still deserve it." He nodded, though his eyes lingered on the distant palace tower where the Queen's quarters glowed faintly. Neither spoke further. The next morning, an urgent call came from the city's central data hub. Liana, Mara, and Daniel arrived with Ember and Rook in tow, their presence drawing wary glances from technicians. A senior engineer guided them to a sealed chamber. "It started during the storm," he explained. "We thought it was interference at first, but then we saw the pattern." The chamber's main screen displayed a growing lattice of symbols, lines of alien script woven like roots through the city's translation grid. The symbols pulsed faintly as if alive. Daniel's eyes widened. They're embedding themselves directly into the system, rewriting definitions in real time. Mara glanced at Liana. "If they finish, we won't even be able to talk to each other without wondering what words mean." A low growl from Ember echoed in the chamber's high ceiling, as if the dragon sensed the threat. Rook's head lowered, eyes narrowing. Suddenly, the screen flickered and a new message appeared in stark white letters. "The Queen will speak a word tonight. It will be her undoing." The message vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the silent lattice of alien script. Liana's voice was cold and sharp. "They're targeting her directly." Daniel exhaled shakily. "If the translation grid's compromised, anything she says in public could be twisted broadcast as something else." Mara snapped her fingers at a nearby technician. "Shut down all external comms to the palace. Isolate the network." The engineer paled. "We can slow it, but the code is burrowing deeper. We'll need hours we don't have." By nightfall, the palace was a fortress. Guards lined the halls, and the dragons perched on the outer walls, wings furled but eyes ever watchful. The Queen convened her closest advisors in a secure chamber lit by crystal lamps. Liana, Mara, and Daniel stood before her. "They mean to turn my own words into weapons," the Queen said quietly. "A single sentence, mistranslated, could ignite the city." Daniel spoke up, his voice steady despite the tension. "We can isolate the translator devices in the council chamber. We'll use only the veiled tongue for now, no cross-system links. I'll monitor the network for interference." The Queen's gaze softened slightly, though her posture remained regal. "Then we will give them no spark to fan." A distant tremor rumbled through the floor, a sound more felt than heard. Ember roared from the outer wall, the sound deep and resonant. Liana's hand moved to her sword hilt. "They're testing the defenses." Mara checked her pistol. "And they'll keep testing until they find a crack." The Queen rose, her voice carrying iron. "Then we will give them no crack. We will stand on the outer wall, beneath a storm-churned sky." Ember shifted restlessly beside Rook. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight as they watched the distant harbor. Far out on the dark waters, a cluster of small lights moved slowly, deliberately toward the city. Liana stepped out beside them, her cloak snapping in the cold wind. She rested a hand on Ember's warm scales and looked out over the water. "They're coming," she murmured. Somewhere deep in the city's grid, unseen lines of code shifted again, preparing to twist the next word spoken. The harbor lights were swallowed by darkness as the storm clouds gathered low and heavy. All along the palace wall, the air trembled as Ember and Rook unfurled their wings, releasing deep, rumbling growls that carried across the water. Liana stood between the dragons, her sword strapped to her back, her gaze fixed on the approaching vessels. They were small, black as ink, and silent, gliding toward the harbor like predators in deep water. Behind her, Daniel worked frantically at a portable console linked to the palace network. 100 meters away, the queen stood on the balcony overlooking the sea, her posture calm yet defiant. Mara arrived at Liana's side. The enemy's masking their approach with interference. We can't get a clean reading, but I'd wager they're not coming just to parley. They'll try to break the queen's resolve tonight, Liana said. Her voice was low, controlled. We can't let them. The first strike came as a flicker through the translator grid, a distortion that hummed in the back of every listener's mind. Words on nearby consoles warped and rearranged themselves into nonsense before reverting, like waves breaking on a cliff. Daniel's fingers flew over the console. They're trying to hijack the core again. I can block them for a while, but they're adapting faster than before. A sudden boom split the night as one of the black vessels in the harbor exploded under a streak of dragon fire. Ember reared back, wings flaring, and let out a roar that made the very stones of the palace tremble. But the other vessels pressed on. The council chamber became a war room. Guards moved quickly to secure the queen's position, while advisors reported in hurried voices. They want her to speak publicly, Mara said grimly, to say something that can be twisted into a declaration of war or surrender. The queen looked up from the table, her eyes sharp. If they believe they can bend my words into their weapon, then they will be disappointed. I will not be silenced. Liana stepped forward. Majesty, we need to be careful. Even a single sentence could be reshaped before it reaches your people. The queen's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Then we shall speak in a tongue they cannot twist. Outside, the battle in the harbor intensified. The enemy vessels fired sleek bursts of plasma that hissed against the palace's shielded walls. Ember and Rook dove from the sky, their roars shaking the heavens as they unleashed gouts of fire on the encroaching swarm. Daniel stared at his console, sweat on his brow. They're overriding the lexicons again. They're aiming for the speech protocols. Anything the queen says into the public channel will be transformed. Block it, Mara snapped. I'm trying. It's like trying to dam a river with bare hands. The lights flickered across the palace. The grid groaned. Somewhere deep in the data network, a new message pulsed through the alien code. The queen will call the human her king tonight. In the palace, the queen stepped forward onto the balcony. Her figure was silhouetted against the lightning-lit sky as she raised her chin and spoke, her voice steady and unflinching. People of the Vale, she began, but her words were in the old native tongue, the one long fallen out of common use. We are beset by shadows that seek to turn our hearts against one another, but we will not yield our trust to those who hide behind lies. The translators faltered, failing to process the ancient tongue correctly. Across the city, citizens gathered around hollow terminals, puzzled but rapt as they heard the unfiltered speech. Daniel's eyes widened as he realized what she was doing. She's bypassing the grid entirely. The old tongue isn't coded. They can't twist it. Liana allowed herself a faint smile. She turned their weapon into their weakness. The enemy vessels, realizing their plan was failing, launched a final, desperate assault. A swarm of dark drones erupted from the ships, streaking through the rain like metal hornets. Rook! Liana shouted. The great dragon launched from the wall with a roar, his wings cutting through the rain as he dove into the swarm. Ember joined, his flames lighting up the storm clouds like burning dawn. The drones shattered beneath claws and fire, falling in smoking shards into the turbulent harbor. Mara fired her plasma pistol from the balcony, picking off strays that slipped past the dragons. Liana moved to the queen's side, blade drawn, as a small cluster of drones breached the palace wall. Daniel slammed the final lock on the console. I've cut them off from the core. They're blind now. The last of the drones crashed onto the marble courtyard, burning out in showers of sparks. The rain slowed, and the distant thunder faded to a low grumble. On the balcony, the queen lowered her arms. Her voice was calm as she spoke once more to her people in the old tongue. "We've seen tonight the words can be turned into chains, but only if we let them. Together, we are stronger than those who would divide us." A hush fell over the courtyard below as the citizens, hearing her true words at last, began to cheer. The sound spread through the city like a wave of relief. Later, in the quiet of dawn, Liana stood by the dragons as they rested, steam rising from their rain-soaked scales. She gazed at the harbor where the wreckage of the enemy fleet still smoldered. Daniel joined her, his expression both tired and thoughtful. "Do you think it's over?" "Not yet," Liana said softly. "But we've won more than a battle tonight. We proved that trust isn't so easily broken." He gave her a faint smile. "And the Queen. She spoke like a leader who knows her people." "She always has," Liana replied. They just needed to hear it without someone else twisting the meaning. In the council chamber, the Queen met Liana's eyes. "You were right, Commander. Our greatest strength lies not in our weapons, but in the truth we share. And thanks to you all, that truth was not silenced." Liana inclined her head. "We stand together, Majesty. We always will." The Queen looked out toward the harbor, the first light of morning glinting on the waves. "Then let our enemies hear this truth. We will not bow to fear or falsehood." If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and follow for more thrilling HFY Sci-Fi adventures. New tales of courage, unity, and survival await you.